Today, we are talking vintage electronics. If you're new here, welcome. My name is Margaret. I make videos helping you learn how to be a better seller on eBay. And I've created a series about the top 10 vintage categories that are selling really well on eBay. And I've created a playlist that I'll link here for you. But today we're going to be talking about vintage electronics. Which vintage electronics are selling really well on eBay right now? And if you're interested in the other videos that are in this playlist, I'll have that linked, but I also have a downloadable PDF that you can fill out as we're going along or when you watch the other videos. This is a great place to keep track of the things I'm sharing, but also the other information that you're gathering about vintage electronics, games, toys, jewelry that you can look for when you're out at thrift stores, garage sales, and estate sales. And not only will I show you the top 10 things from my list on this video, I'm going to show you exactly how I got this information because I think it's super important that you know how to go in, figure out this information for yourself so that if you're watching this video and it's a year or more down the line and you're wondering if these are still things that are selling, maybe there's something else that's selling. Or maybe you're not interested in electronics, but you want to know what games or toys or anything in the world that might be selling on eBay. You want to find out what's selling well, what's selling for a big profit, and what's selling now. I'll be showing you exactly how to do that. It takes a lot of the guesswork out of looking things up at the thrift store if you have a list to go off of. And you know, I have to ask before we get started, if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, I would really appreciate it. It lets YouTube know that my content is relevant and that people are enjoying learning from my channel. So I would really appreciate it if you take a second and go hit the subscribe button and the bell. Let's get started. The first item on the list are vintage Sony Walkman cassette players. I have searched vintage Sony Walkman cassette players and there's over 1,000+ results in completed and sold listings. I also selected used because when I did the search, there were a few vintage ones that were still new in the package. They were just like new old stock that hadn't been opened. And I thought, well, most likely we will be finding ones that are out of the box. So I excluded those, but you could always go back and add them in. What are we looking at here? So this is sorted by highest first. This is a Sony Walkman DC2, and there's one here, one here. When I scroll down, here's another one down here. But all three of those sold for well over $1,000 and even $2,000 in one case. When I'm going through looking at these different items that are selling really well, I like it when I see that there's the same item that is sold for a high price from many different sellers. That lets me know it's not just this one-off fluke that sold randomly. Another one to look for is this Sony DD100 Budokan. You will see that there are these characters on the front of it. So there are a few different ones. Here's one that's sold for $1,250, another that's sold for $1,050. But you'll notice here's this one and this one here. Same photo, so it's either the same seller or somebody borrowed the photo from that seller. But here it is again from a different seller as well. And another one to look for is this Sony Walkman TPS L2, and it's blue. So if you find the blue one, this is another one that can sell for hundreds of dollars. Next up on the list are vintage calculators. There are over 6,900 results for vintage calculators that have sold in the last 90 days on eBay. And if you'll look, I have these sorted by highest first. There are quite a few of these big honking calculators. So if you see something really big like these might be worth picking up if you find them for relatively cheap at a thrift store or garage sale. $6,000, $5,000. And as I scroll down, I wanted to point out there's this, I don't know if it's pronounced Serta or Kurta, but there's multiple of these. I feel like if I saw this, I would want to look at it just because of the novelty of what it looks like, because I've never really seen anything like it. But there are multiple of these. $1,930 here, $1,900 here. Scrolling down, this one looks a little more contemporary, but it's still $1,900 that this one sold for. Another one that keeps showing up again and again is this HP 71B calculator/computer sold for $1,399. And it looks like this. It's got the letters and it's got the numbers. And then there's this vintage HP 35 scientific calculator. And you'll notice the writing down here, HP, and then it's got the Hewlett Packard. It's a little bit more boxy than more contemporary calculators. The buttons are a little further apart, and you'll notice this little pi button right here down at the bottom. So if you see any calculators that look a little bit unusual, they don't look like a regular, just numbers and equation signs along the side. It's got a little something extra. It might be worth looking into. How do I get this information? Let's take a look at how you can come in and also research different categories of items to see what's selling right now on eBay. What you're going to do is you're going to go to your seller hub. And if you're not sure how to get there, you'll come up to the sell button, click that, and then this will open up. You'll come to more and then select research. And once you've done that, it gets to this research products tab. And here's where you will type in anything that you might be wanting to research. So let's say I want to research calculators. Calculator. So I'll type in calculator. This is pulling data from the last 90 days, but if I just want the last 7 days or the last 2 years, I can go in and adjust that. Condition filter, I want to see just used calculators because that's probably what I'm going to find. Don't forget to come down and hit apply. I do that all the time. And then I can come over and do best offer, auction, etc. And if I want to make sure, I don't want any calculators that are like 50 cents. So I want to see calculators that have sold for $30 or more. Then what I will see is a list of all the things that sold that had calculator in the title and met the other parameters that I set. So here I can come down and look at this TI-84. It's yellow. $48. Here's another one, like right off the bat, there's multiples of the same one, TI-84 Plus, sold for right around that $45 to $50. So this is how you can come in and quickly see what is selling. So here I've got a whole bunch of different ones. Well, normally I can come in and say minus lot if I don't want to see a lot of different ones. But another thing I'm noticing is that there's this Apple iPod Touch. These are selling $37, $44, great. And I just wanted to show you that so that you could come in and type in anything that you enjoy selling and really hone in on what kinds of things are selling for a big profit right now when you're out there thrifting, garage selling, and going to estate sales, looking for things to flip on eBay. The next item on our vintage electronics that sell really well on eBay are vintage iPods. And I wanted to point something out in the search. Here I've searched iPod first generation, and there are 1,200 plus results for completed and sold listings. But if I put in original iPod, which was my original search, I was like, oh, that's really not that many. 316, that doesn't seem that good. And then I started realizing, wait a minute, it might not be called that. So when you are listing your item, you might consider adding in some of these other keywords, because if somebody just looks up original iPod and you're selling one of the first generation ones, you might miss that buyer if you don't have the word original in there, because over here, first generation iPod 1,200 sold, but that means that there are about 900 that didn't show up for me here. So imagine if you are the buyer, you don't know to call it a first generation iPod. You're like, I don't know what it's called. I just want the original one, original iPod. Well, you know what? You've got this many to choose from. And if your listing isn't showing up in that search, then you might not be found. However, these people did get found and sold as well, but it's just little things to tweak and think about when you're making your listings. How is the buyer searching for that item? Right off the bat on this first generation iPod, I see the first few that have sold for a great profit do have the box. They are pre-owned, except for this first one, but they have that original packaging, which may or may not be something you find. So I want to scroll down and look for ones that are out of the box and what those are selling for. This is the one I had when they first came out. And this sold for $434 with best offer taken. Here are a couple more that sold, one for $350, one for $295 with best offer taken. So what you'll see is it's got the round wheel, but it didn't have the capability where you push the button. It has a separate button. The ring outside of it was the button you had to press. So it has this extra ring on it. So if you see that, you know you've got the first generation iPod. Later, it started looking like, where is it? Where's one? Like these, where you could just push on the wheel instead of having a separate little wheel for the buttons. But here's another one. This one has the charger and the ear pods, and this one sold for $299. Here's another $295, $299, and a couple more for right around that $250 mark. So if you see this first generation original iPod, pick it up because it can be worth hundreds of dollars. Next up on our list are vintage boomboxes. I purposefully didn't choose a specific brand for these because there are many different brands, and I wanted you to really get an eye for these big boomboxes. You remember in the 80s, or they would have them up on their shoulder like that and walk around. They thought they were so cool, right? Probably at the chiropractor right now. And they would sometimes on roller skates, right? They would have these big old boom boxes. So here is a Marantz. And if I said that wrong, just forgive me. It sold for $1,800. National RX A5 sold for $2,880. Here's a Toshiba and a Panasonic that sold for over $2,000. One of them that I see that is selling repeatedly is this Dynasty Disco Light. So this one, $2,324. I almost skipped it because it said it was located in Ukraine. However, because usually I'll have this scaled down to just the US. Here's another one that sold $1,600. This one came out of Australia. So definitely, if you see that Disco Light boombox, pick it up. But as you can see, here's this JVC boombox, $1,500. This vintage Sharp boombox sold for $999. And here are a couple JVC that are both, it looks like the same model, that sold $975 on this one and $850 on the other. So that's why I really didn't want to narrow it down to just one brand. If you see a big boom box, take a second and look it up because it could be worth hundreds, if not thousands of dollars. Next up on our vintage electronics that are selling for great profits on eBay is vintage Speak and Spell. I wanted to point this out as well. We talked about those search terms that you can throw in there, but I also want to show you here when I search Speak and Spell, I use the ampersand symbol and I tried it again spelling out the word and. So here I've got 353 results. Here I've got 309 results. So there are about 50 results difference. So if you are listing something like this that has an and you're tempted just to say ampersand, make sure that later in your listing, you spell out the word and so that you're caught up in all the searches. This first listing is a lot. So it's $249 for that lot. But if you continue to look on, here's this Speak and Spell, $140 for this one, $211 on this. And look at this Speak and Spell guitar. This one sold for $119. And as I scroll down, there are some with boxes, some without, but they're selling for around $90 to $100. And I wanted to point out that the ones that are typically selling for the higher price are the Speak and Spells that have the buttons that you actually push. So you see these little circle buttons. There are newer versions of Speak and Spell that have a flat pad that you're pressing onto. And it looks like this. This can still sell, but it's not at that higher price. This one sold for $47.04. The next vintage electronic that is selling for a big profits on eBay are vintage Polaroid cameras. Right off the bat, we've got 4,700 sold listings in the last 90 days. I do still have lots here, so I'm going to scroll past those. But the first thing I'm noticing is the vintage Polaroid SLR 690 camera. It's got this big round lens here in the front. I'm not even sure that's a lens, but we've got a light up here. We've got this. Somebody probably will know what it is. And then the camera is here. One sold for $650 with best offer taken. Another at almost $600 with best offer taken. It looks like this person might have the same listing here. However, the camera is the camera's in a different spot, but it looks like the same photograph that they have taken there. And then down here, we've got a couple more, $549, $539. So very expensive. And I am kicking myself because I had one of these. I don't know where it is now. I wonder if I still have it somewhere. But I had one of these and I saw that they had repurposed it in Andor. Where are my Star Wars fans? If you know which scene it's in where they have taken this camera and they turned it into something else, it's not a camera, but they used it as a like old tech in the show, then leave me a comment. You get bonus points if you know which episode and which scene it was in. But this Polaroid SX70, $549. Here's another one down here for $500. And then check out this Polaroid. This one is a Macro 5, sold for $500. And it's really funky looking, so I think you won't miss it. Here's another $487. And here are a few more same models that we've been talking about. The Macro, the SLR are right around that $450 mark. The next item on our vintage electronics that are selling really well on eBay are vintage Game Boys. And I wanted to again show the search differences because of course I started with original Game Boy. 3,100 results here. Vintage Game Boy, and Game Boy being 2 words, 2,000 results. And then vintage Game Boy with Game Boy as 1 word, 1,000 plus results. And finally, 1989 Game Boy, because that's the original year, 1,600 results. So making sure you have a variety of search terms in case the person types it in incorrectly, or they are very specific about the year, or they want the original one, if you have the original one. So here's the original Game Boy. This one does have the box. This sold for $479. This Nintendo Game Boy Advance sold for $426. And this Pikachu version sold for $449. Here's another of the Pikachu versions that sold for $365. And you'll see here that there are 10 that are being sold for junk or parts that sold for $377. My rule of thumb with things like this that I know a little about, but not a huge amount about, is that I want to make sure if I see Game Boy that I'm going to take a moment to look it up because I don't want to leave one behind and it end up being worth $269. Don't adjust your screens. Our next vintage item that is selling for hundreds, if not thousands of dollars on eBay are vintage Trinitron TVs. And let's talk about why. So in my search, I searched Sony Trinitron TV. Some of these are not the Trinitron. I think maybe they got keyword spammed, but we're looking at these big boxy old TVs. This one sold for $1,900. Here's another $799, $1,300 here. So a lot of times you might even find them like free. People are giving them, like, get this big box of a TV out of here, right? Because they don't know that this TV is worth $1,200. Now, why? The reason the Sony Trinitron, here's a bunch more. This one tells you right here. The reason that it is selling for so much money is that there are a lot of retro gamers out there and they've got their old game system. They've got the old power cords. They want to plug it into a TV and have that vintage experience. And the Sony Trinitron has really good visuals on screen. So it's got a higher resolution, the colors are better. And so vintage gamers like this version of old TVs to play their games on because the screens and everything looks so much better. And the reason they can be so expensive is because you can't just go down to your local Best Buy and buy one. So here's one that sold for $999. This is a 1972. The next vintage electronic that's selling really well on eBay are vintage synthesizers. So what are you going to look for? Vintage synthesizers, they're going to look like a keyboard. However, there's going to be a whole lot of mess going on up top here. There's going to be buttons and dials and all kinds of things happening. And that's what you're going to look for. So here, I've got it sorted the wrong way over here, so I'll come back to that one. But here I've got it sorted highest first. And this is a Jupiter 4, the Jupiter 6, $5,000, $4,000. Here are a couple others. It's a Roland. I don't know the brands really well on these. So Roland here, $2,000, $3,000. If you see something that looks like a keyboard with a whole bunch of knobs and buttons and whatnot up at the top, then take a moment to look it up. Honestly, it might just be worth picking up if it's a really busy estate sale and there's a lot of people that might want it, because this is why I created this other tab, because I have it sorted here by highest first. Here I just did ended recently because I'm like, I want to see, are they just all selling like that? So even at ended recently, the Casio one sold for $15, but $399. And here we got $375, $100 over here, $150 on this expansion piece. $400 here, $90 here, $599, $559 here. So there are a few that are lower end, but overall, even with ended recently, they're still in the hundreds of dollars. Next up on the list are Spacemaker appliances. Originally, I had this sorted just by GE Spacemaker, but as I was scrolling through, I was like, where's the can opener, right? Because I just thought GE made them. It turns out, no. There are lots of different companies that make Spacemakers, and I thought it was just a GE thing, but my grandmother had the under the cabinet can opener, the radio. She had all the Spacemaker stuff. But as it turns out, it wasn't just made by GE. So here are 110 results for GE Spacemaker. And if you're not sure, I just kind of give a clue for it, but it's the appliances in the kitchen that you would mount under the cabinet so they would hang down and they would leave space on the counter, right? So here are TVs, there's radios, 150 on this, 144 on this one. And then that's, as I was going, I was like, where? I know they make other things. Where are they? It's not just TVs. Black & Decker also makes them. So here's the Black & Decker toaster that's under the counter for $4.99 on this one. The coffee pot for $3.49. That reminds me of like 9 to 5 and Jane Fonda. The popcorn, if you find the Spacemaker popcorn, oh my goodness, $3.52 on this one. Yeah. And I still haven't seen, where's the, is this the one? No, this is the coffee pot. Yeah, my grandmother had the one that was the can opener underneath. So you don't need to see it. You get the idea. I don't need to keep looking for the one my grandmother had. But again, I also searched just the Spacemaker to see if there's more than just Black & Decker and GE. But for the most part, Black & Decker, GE, looks like the popcorn is one that's really selling for a great profit. Haha, I found it. So here it is, the can opener. That's what my grandmother had for sure. $169 on the can opener. If you think I left a vintage electronic off this list that should have been there, give it some justice and leave a comment. Let me know what other vintage electronics should have ended up on this list. And make sure you check out the comment section because I learned tons of stuff from the comments from you guys. And you guys learn from each other. So definitely leave a comment when you go and see what other people are adding to this list. And if you got any kind of value out of the content, I would love it if you would subscribe to the channel. I'll also make sure to link the playlist here so you can check out the other videos in this series. And I have the downloadable PDF in the description box below. Thank you so much for hanging out, and I will see you on the next video. Bye.